It's been a minute since I've reviewed a Marvel movie, and that's by design. Their design. Since Phase 1 began way back in 2008, Marvel has basically stuck to the same formula without deviating as much as a handcuff's chain length away from it. I really can't blame them for that. It's their formula, not to mention the positive critical reception and tremendous box office success speaks for itself, hence why other films have attempted imitation. However, from my personal reviewing standpoint, Marvel flicks have always been uninspiring. Still haven't read a comic book, so I couldn't analyse them from that perspective, but it's mainly because I find their live-action adaptations so consistent to the point where I'd be copy and pasting the transcript and only changing the character names. Don't get me wrong, it's good consistency on their part, but if I were to review every Marvel movie, my material would be more repetitive than Amber Heard's lies. So Doctor Strange finds himself protecting teenage girl America Chavez from being kidnapped by monsters working for a higher power who wishes to steal her ability to travel between alternate dimensions. Fucking hammer smashed that spoiler-free synopsis harder than Camille Vasquez nails a cross-examination. You may have guessed that after listening to my opening paragraph that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness drifts away from the traditional Marvel MO. It's predominantly a supernatural horror film with a dash of the usual routine. That's not a groundbreaking merge. There are many superhero movies containing aspects of horror, some of which are fucking atrocious, but thankfully this one isn't. Although the horror overall is quite moderate, it does rather well considering the 12A restrictions. Jump scares are on point, there's certain levels of gore, and the Michael Myers-esque chase down was so close to perfection. This comes as no surprise when you discover the movie is helmed by Sam Raimi, whose resume is loaded with supernatural horror, and lest we forget 3 Spider-Man films, the third of which was received about as well as an overused drill bit to the Japs eye. To its credit, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness doesn't assume you've seen all things Marvel. For example, there are blatant tie-ins to WandaVision, and despite me never having watched that show, these aspects of the narrative were easy to piece together. There could be more affiliation with other Marvel content I haven't came across, but that went unnoticed and didn't result in me feeling confused by the story. The action is a dramatic improvement compared to its predecessor. I remember being frustrated with the first one over the fact that magic was mostly used to materialize melee weapons, which I thought was quite bromidic, but here it's utilized way more efficiently. Yes, the corporealization of stabbies and whatnot is certainly still present, but it doesn't take up the majority of the mana this time. In fact, we are treated to a lot of fanciful sorcery pretty much straight off the bat by ways of a couple of boss fights separated only by a brief interlude. I endorse that type of pacing, but alas it came to a grinding halt when the movie insisted on story arc and attempting to make the characters relatable. The former is fair enough, but the latter was a fuck up because I don't even for a fraction of the 126-minute duration wish to be reminded that I exist. Visually speaking, the film is erratic. There were moments of pure eyegasm, but also at times the CGI was heinous, and in my mind that type of imbalance is unacceptable when you factor in the $200 million budget. Also, in parts it lacked imagination. Remember, we're dealing with the multiverse here. The possibilities for outrageously quirky set design was literally limitless. Sure, there were short snippets of quirk, but the alternate dimensions we spent the majority in was either the eye-rolling familiar with plantation draped over the buildings, or floating debris lensed with a filter so generic that it's beneath the most basic Instagram bitch. The sections that were famished of creativity weren't made up for in sense. I had a moment pointed out to me where Doctor Strange and America Chavez are apprehended in another dimension and placed in plastic chambers as a precaution in case the two are carrying diseases that their captor's dimension doesn't have a cure for. Seems logical, but what isn't as such is their cells aren't completely sealed, so any airborne virus on their persons that could easily cause potential harm would be able to access that dimension's inhabitants with relative ease. I usually leave highlighting those types of flaws to other critics, but I couldn't help but get irritated over the fact that within seconds of explaining why they're imprisoned in this way, Strange was let out untested, then escorted around the facility and subsequently exposed to potentially vulnerable people. That would be like not knowing whether a guy you're about to fuck is carrying an STD, so you use a condom you've poked holes in because reasons, and then have him finish in your mouth anyway because reasons. Soundtrack is good though. It very much complemented the everything, especially when it came to combat segments. So there's that. There isn't much that I can say regarding the performances of the main cast. They've been playing these parts since the early stages of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so they're very much in their stride X amount of installments deep into their respective roles. The new addition comes in the form of Xochitl Gomez's America Chavez, and she does just fine. Nothing revolutionary and nothing worthy of butchery. I believe that this was the perfect film to introduce this character, however the MCU is so oversaturated with superheroes that I fear she will disappear into the ether and only re-emerge by ways of cameos in future ensemble movies. MVP unquestionably goes to Elizabeth Olsen. This outing as Wanda Maximoff / Scarlet Witch has been the best I have seen her execute. This is down to her having the strongest screen presence by far. Her ability to project range is on full display, also every scene she's in becomes her possession, not to mention she also looks badass during the action and horror elements, so the MVP title is earned for sure. I promise you it has nothing to do with me loving the idea of spending each morning using my cock or face to push her breakfast back up inside what I imagine to be a flawless large intestine. Traditionally for me, 99% of Marvel's contribution to live action feels like it was produced in a cloning factory fueled by mitosis. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is certainly a part of that remaining 1%. A mutation of that formula, if you will, and I honestly think that given the nature of its premise, it wouldn't have worked otherwise. The hardcore fanbase, I theorise, will leave their showing satisfied and have most likely felt compelled to do so several times before this review lands. Honestly, I don't envy their position. This was the 28th feature film since this shit started with Iron Man back in 2008, and on top of that you've got the various TV programs plus those in association with bollocks that spewed across reluctant screens. Fuck, the FOMO must be overwhelming, whereas I get the luxury of waking up every day knowing I'm less committed to this franchise than Amber Heard was to being a punch bag.